Yeah.
Is it just his or?
How about now? Do not. Again, thank you all for being here. I think we may have one or two persons online. We thank you as well. And we hopefully will be able to get through this in a fairly short order. If you would please join me for a moment of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for this another day. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the students in our schools in Robeson County. And we thank you, Lord, for the staff and the parents, the whole community who work together to make life better for everyone. And again, especially our children. Be with us now as we discuss policies that are important to the operation of our system. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. These are policy updates and minor changes. If you have looked at the title on the cover, and in reading the policy, we have seen most of this before. These are existing policies where some changes were necessary. Some of them, and most of them, quite small and minor. Although really nothing is minor when we consider the importance and the weightiness of our policy. And we'll just briefly touch on each one, and then if there are questions or something that we need to interject or insert, then we will do that. 2121 begins with board member conflict of interest. That is very straightforward. And gives us, all of us as board members, a track to run on as to activities that as board members we may be engaged in or may plan to engage in that may come into direct conflict with the interest of matters of the board and, of course, ultimately our school system. Are there any questions or comments on that particular section? Hearing none, do I hear a motion that we accept 2121 as presented in our current policy update manual?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. The next section, 2210, duties of officers. And again, it specifies the duties of the chairperson, vice chair, duties of the chairperson pro tempore, duties of the board secretary. And again, all of those are very straightforward. In reading through these, I was pleased to realize that we are following those title descriptions in terms of duties. Any questions, comments on that section? Hearing none, do I hear a motion that we accept the duties of board members, of board officers as presented in the policy update manual? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. Brings us to policy development. 2410. And of course, our superintendent being our chief executive officer, has general oversight for the implementing and review and evaluation of all policies adopted by the board, and bring to the board's attention the need for adopting, revising, rescinding particular policies. And of course, we have been leading the way as the policy committee in accomplishing that. I did have a asterisk by the third paragraph: as appropriate in the development of proposed new policies or revision of existing policies, superintendent shall seek input from the board attorney, other professional school system personnel, parents, students, and citizens.
Yes. Well, I know that. Mine. And guess what?
I don't think that was intended for us. I know we, obviously our board attorney and our superintendent reviews all policies. I am concerned about the overall input from the community, including parents, students, citizens. We have had remote attendance from some of our building board leaders, principals, and others at times. I don't know how many we have on the call today. I think we just have one or two. Is that right, Cole? That are participating remotely. And I don't know what course of action we need to take to invite and to secure additional participation from the community. As we know, we do as a board by default, and I will say this, that we end up reacting to complaints, issues that are brought to the board after the fact, and without getting into any specific incidences. I think all of us have an idea of what I'm referring to. And I would like to have a think tank, if you will, to consider ways that we could procure and secure more public involvement in doing this. I mean, we're all here, and most of us are full-time staff. I realize people have the opportunity to join remotely, but I'd like to see us be more proactive in involving the general public, and as it says here specifically, that list of individuals or groups of individuals that could help us in fine-tuning or even broadening some of the areas that eventually become policies. Anybody like to comment on that? And Dr. Williams, I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. Do you think it would be worthwhile to come up with a cross-section of individuals, maybe some parents that are already involved in big ways, and I don't mean fill the room, but to, obviously North Carolina School Board Association does a masterful job of writing these policies, but it's up to us to tailor make or to revise as needed. That's our purpose for reviewing these. And I don't mean get into the nuts and bolts of it right now, but I think maybe we need to try to look to broaden our input and participation from certain segments of the population.
Well, I think there's some value if we add some parents to this committee.
Yeah.
Because the issue, like you said, is not drafting a policy. We've employed the School Board Association to do that. The issue has always been about implementation of policies. Is the issue. So I think there's some value if you add maybe a couple of parents to that. Could be.
Right. And maybe we can talk later how we might construct that. Um, and this whole section is devoted to policy development. Again, we just briefly outline how that happens. You all know how it happens. Something did catch my attention here. New policy, and I'm still on page 1 of 2 under policy development, page 2410. New policies introduced and recommended at a board meeting will not be adopted until a subsequent meeting. And as we know, whether we have a first reading or a second reading or no reading depends on the stage of the policy development. Ms. Bobby, help me on this. When we present this to the board, a second reading will not be necessary. It will simply come to a motion and a vote on the night of the board meeting. Am I correct in that, Mr. Bobby?
Yes, sir. That is correct, because all of our policies that we're working on today are currently going to be revisions. So once the policy committee reviews those and makes or agrees with the recommendation from the School Board Association or makes additional revisions, all we have to do is bring those revisions to the board for approval. We don't need a second reading. Only for new policies, or is that first reading and then the second reading?
Let me throw this into the mix and just go back to what I said a few minutes ago. And I'm looking at the second paragraph under B. The sentence says, board members may propose amendments at the first or second reading of the policy. An amendment will not require that policy go through a third reading, except as the board determines that the amendment needs further study and that an additional reading would be desirable. To me, that it goes right into sync with what I said about additional input and participation. The word amendments comes, that's standing out there like a sore thumb. Amendments means that there's been a group of cross-section of interested persons that have gotten together and have proposed particular adjustments or amendments. They come back into the policy as a form of amendments. And so my mind, we need to make this a living and active document. We hear about the Constitution being that, and I think our school policy should be no less. So I'm just pointing that out as a matter of emphasis. And I won't go into detail with this. Again, the North Carolina School Board Association did strike through the section on adoption of policy 2420. And again, that tells me that this is a living and working document. But the language continues on, it's like in C of 2410, it's talking about revising and rescinding the existing board policy. And we know as time moves on, things change and it does become necessary to adjust or rescind or revise. Anybody that feels like jumping in, go ahead, but this is about policy, and that's what we're doing this morning. Any other thoughts about what I said about having a working, and I know the word committee is often overused, but developing something more ongoing in terms of reviewing and adjusting our policies, rather than just coming to a one-time meeting and like this one, and we basically rubber stamp it and go on.
Mr. Chair, give us time to process that, because we need to be. I'm hearing the conversation, and I'm not being anything but honest. It depends on who.
Yeah.
I'm be honest about that. It depends on who now. Because the responsibility of policy through the School Board Association and this board and the review. And again, if the conversation is about implementation of policies, then we can also go back to the School Board Association and they will give us guidance in terms of how to implement policies. But just to say we're going to open, I think that's possible. It's something that we need to do. But I'll be honest, and I know someone's going to say shouldn't have said, but it depends on who. I'm going to be honest about that.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me, Mr. Cole? Good. I'm gonna go back to these committees, and policy is one of them. These committees are established by our school board and by the chairman. And the people on these committees that we put on are school board members. So now I'm not sure, and I don't want people to take this wrong, I'm not sure adding parents to these committees the way they're constructed would be in line with what our responsibility is. Now, getting input, that's fine, but I'm gonna go back. The school board puts this policy together, and rubber stamp is right. They put it together with what they understand, and then we have the right to look at something and make an adjustment. But I'm still going back to what our responsibility is. And let's say, and I'm gonna say now, this is put out and people's invited. They can come to this, and if they have a comment, of course, they don't have the books. Now, if you decide that we're going to add parents to this, then my question is, how do we do that with the fact we got finance committee and other committees, and all of those are committees, for the board? That's a question that I would have. To me, that would have to be clarified.
Right.
And a lot of policies, and I think this is true. I mean, I can say it. A lot of policies, ever how thick our book is. We look at them, we study them, other people look at them, study them. The policies are not looked at and studied a lot of times until it affects you.
Right.
That's when it becomes real, when there's something happens that affects you as a parent or your child, or something that y'all have a situation down here that we have to deal with, then you had to go find the policy. We look at them, approve them, but that's when it becomes real, when that particular policy is affecting something that you are involved with. So I mean, it's worth looking at, discussion, but I think there are some things we would have to look at as far as what our responsibilities are on these committees. And, parents can come in, and I think I know they've been invited. I know we're just getting back to where, the public's welcome.
Right.
And I'm going to say this too, the public's welcome at our meetings. Talking about next Tuesday. Me personally, I think we ought to have 100 or 200 people at every meeting we got out in the audience. But we know that doesn't happen. But I would want them there and want them here. So, but as your suggestion, that's something I think we'd need to look at and study and just see how it would relate to what we have in place.
Well, and I agree. I was just putting that out there. And you made an excellent point about, okay, if we're going to broaden the composition of the committee for the policy committee, then we probably need to have equal treatment for the other committees as you begin to get things a little maybe too opened. But anyway, that's just food for thought. And so now, having said that, are there any further comments or questions on 2410 policy development? Hearing none, do I hear a motion that we accept 2410 policy development as presented in the manual? Second? Is there a second? In discussion, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Okay, move on to dissemination and preservation of policies along the same lines of, again, policy being a living and working entity. I highlighted the sentence in the second paragraph. I think it is the third sentence. The board intends that the official physical manual and electronic duplicate will have identical content at all times. Should there a discrepancy between the two arise, it should be resolved in accordance with the board's most recent action of the policy. And Mr. Bobby, I know that whenever we make an adjustment or revision, you at some point, as close as possible after the meeting, insert that into the existing policy. Is that?
Yes. So what happens is, And I'll use this, for example, when this is approved next Tuesday night, the revisions we make, that following Wednesday, I will email the School Board Association with the revision date of all of these policies. And if we make any other changes, what those other changes are. And at that point, they immediately become effective, and our website or the website that hosts the policy manual update immediately. And then to keep our employees informed, the policies are, as soon as we get the copies back from the School Board Association, principals, assistant principals, district office staff are emailed all revisions as they're made.
And their legal team reviews any of our proposed.
Yes. And I've even gone back to when we started this process and followed back up with all revisions that have been made from day one. So principals, assistant principals are aware, going all the way back to when we started this, probably December of 20, I believe, in the fall, winter of 20. So all revisions in the past year have been emailed to everybody.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I was going to ask this later, but maybe it's a good time. Mr. Bobby, what you just said, going back to 20, where are we at with the board of reviewing, revising the entire document? I mean, are we halfway, three-quarters?
No, sir. So we have gone through the entire policy manual from the 1000s to the 9000s. Every meeting that we're going to have from here on out will be just like this, a legal change. The School Board Association realizes some things, legal references may change, and come back and say, let's update this policy based on new general statute or new interpretation of the law. So the entire policy manual has been revised. Has been revised. Everything we're going to do moving forward is going to be, if we see a change where a policy needs to be changed and or the School Board Association deems a policy to be looked at again.
And that brings me to that's fantastic. I mean, I think Mr. Gentry and y'all have done a great job. It's been revised. Okay. That leads me to the one thing we had talked about one time earlier, and people say it's too thick, but I'm a little old fashioned about, Mr. Bobby knows where I'm going, about what it would take to actually print out the copies of, I mean, if it's worthwhile doing and putting one in a school and then I know there'd be a revision next month and you'd be sending them here's another one. But, or if you didn't send a revision that way in the printed copy, just, and I'm not saying decide now, but just think about, is it worth putting how many 3-ring binders it would take now? One time it was one. I figured now it'd be at least 2 or 3 probably.
And so, Mr. Chair, if I may, so if we're 2430, that second paragraph there does require us to keep a physical copy.
Yeah.
So when I started reviewing these new updates, I did reach out to Candace, and as soon as we get these approved, we will begin the process of printing at least one physical copy here in the at district office. But as you said, as new things pop up, we're going to have to keep those, keep it updated, removing the old and inserting the new.
Yeah, that third paragraph says the superintendent or designee shall update both the physical policy manual. You saw that already.
Yes,
yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Also, if the stand-in policy at the time, when needed or resourced, I understand is going to be the most current would be on the PSRC website.
Yes, sir.
Right. You get that out quick. I mean, that's you get all that. But for us old-fashioned people that wants that piece of paper, like myself, and they to me would end up with that policy manual. And like I said, there's things that they would deal with regularly, where they got marked. Okay, I know I got to look at this because something's gonna come up about this regularly. And you take that manual to me and just, of course, the people that with the computer, they know where to go to it with the computer too. But there's certain things you're just going to look at, and other things it's ever so often that you have to deal with.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, and this is something that Candace and I have discussed as well when we're going back researching policies, when we've had issues, if there are multiple revisions, if we have a paper copy, then if I have to go back 3 revisions to find out what changed between 17 and 18 or 18 and 20, then having a paper copy and storing those old copies would help us as well, because we've had questions where we've changed the policy and then didn't know what the policy was prior to, because we didn't have, all we have is your revision. We don't know what happened prior to that revision.
Bobby, do you have a tickler or system to where you can immediately turn to that in a color coded or some way to give you an indication of those policies that have been changed, to where you can immediately find them, or do you?
No, what I do have is I have electronic files from the School Board Association, and every revision, like when we were going back doing all revisions. So I have a folder or a folder on my computer that has all the revisions that were done when we were doing the 1000s. So every time we meet and make revisions, I have a folder that indicates all the revisions that were made at that particular time.
That's even better.
Yeah, but
even
anything prior to the work we did in 20 or beginning in 20, I don't have any documentation of what those old policies were.
Excellent. Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, we'll move on. And there are a number of these sections where the original has been stricken, as Bobby just alluded. Policy review and evaluation, 2440 is an example. Suspension of board policies, 2450 is stricken. Moving on to consultants to the board, 2600. And when I read this, I thought of policy elsewhere that, and it speaks to the section about board members and family members and friends being contractors with the school system and other situations like that. This one speaks specifically to consultants to the board, which is important also. And I know during the course of the year, there are a number of situations where there are consultants that that provide service to the board, and it does refer to policy 6450, which I have not looked at, that comprehensively treats that particular matter. And this is just a brief paragraph reminding us essentially of that. Just a general question here, I directed it anybody. Has the process of procuring and utilizing consultants and paying them, has that been a pretty smooth process up to this point?
It has been. In fact, we're going through that process now on some, but it has been not a problem, and we're mindful of conflict of interest. Right. That does not happen. A lot of it's based on the need and the details that we need other work, but
you could run into a similar situation like with your physical work on buildings and so forth, with family and friends. You could run into the same kind of situation.
Absolutely.
Any further questions or comments at this time? Do I hear a motion that we accept the
Motion to
policy
accept policy 2600.
All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Online instruction, and boy, this is a big, comprehensive topic, and obviously a very timely one. And I'll just bring this out, and I know this is, again, it's timely, and it's got to be on, I would say, everyone's minds, and I'll just put it in a nutshell, and that is the potential. I won't say it's going on, but the potential for abusing the privilege and the opportunity for having online instruction now that it is so easily acceptable. Are there situations where it's being abused at this time?
I'll start that conversation, one, by clarifying definitions, our online instruction basically through North Carolina Public Schools, our virtual school. And so that's pretty clear in terms of that. It is remote instruction where we find that, and as you read number B, that is only intended to be temporary. And so again, we have found that our intent is to be face to face and not have that to be long term. That's where the abuse has happened, and kids are not connecting and missing days. And Robert and Bobby, you want to add to that? The online through the North Carolina Virtual Public Schools is solid, clearly defined with that. It's remote, and again, that intent is only temporary.
Well, and footnote 4 bears that out. I won't read the whole thing, but it's the board has responsibility. Ultimately, it says the board, but obviously the everyday staff would need to implement, and I'm sure does implement that on a regular basis, oversight and making sure that it's in compliance with what it's intended for.
That also,
Yeah.
that also covers the EC process.
I was going to say normally for, our short-term, long-term, we provide the online, but reporting, we don't have a whole lot of abusing. Like I said, most time it's just, students not getting on like they should, but actually abusing the system, no, we haven't had a whole lot of that I'm aware of.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we're responsible for the COVID online, the COVID remote option. Now, of course, that was heavy at the beginning of the year, and now that numbers have dropped, what I'm seeing now, we're still getting a handful of applications a week of parents who are saying that because of COVID, their children can't be in the building. Some of those, in doing some research, they've had a whole lot of attendance issues, and now those attendance issues have caught up with them. And so now they want to use our remote option as a means to go to court and say, my child had issues, therefore that's why they couldn't be in the building. So we had some as late, we've had 2 or 3 this week to come in and apply for the remote option to finish out the school year. So there are some that this is a legitimate need for, but there are also some that are using this as a means to evade the attendance piece, or to just simply not be in the building.
And I realize no monitoring system can be 100% ironclad. You have to do the best you can with that. And I know we do have some monitoring instruments in place to do that. Any other comments, questions? Online instruction.
Make a motion, we approve 3102.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. School Improvement Plan 3430.
Chair, if I may, let me ask Dr. Carr if she would walk us through school improvement. In fact, she's been working this week with principals on that process that really aligns with NC Star through DPI, please.
Thank you, sir.
So what we've done this past week, we wanted to make sure everybody was clear on expectations of what school improvement should look like. And because we're using NC Star and a lot of platforms and have a lot of different initiatives that need to align all together, because school improvement is about having everything together in a process that shows this is the vision for where the school is headed based on what the district has going on in the schools. So what we've done is reviewed not only what state mandates are to make sure they're clear on what state mandates are, but also reflected back onto the policy to say, these are the pieces of the policy. What we've heavily spent our time on is what should this look like when you have completed this vision based on what the district is moving towards with leverage leadership, with MTSS, with curriculum changes, so that all those pieces align. Because what school improvement is asking them to do is write a cohesive plan that shows what you're doing with your curriculum, how are you going to achieve these goals to make sure that everybody in your building gets an equitable education and that they're growing. And so we spend a lot of time also working on how do you write some good actions that align with what you need in your building. So what are the tasks and actions needed and necessary in your building to make it happen and be successful, but also not overwhelm everybody because you're putting your own initiatives in. So thinking about what are truly the needs as a district, but then as your school, adapting that to make sure it addresses your school needs, particularly about certain subgroups. So if you have a large L population, how are you addressing that? Or if you have, like we spent a lot of time talking about family engagement, because that is a large piece of school improvement. How do we make sure those families and parents are part of the process? So we had a lot of conversation about how do we improve that family engagement in the process of what school improvement should look like so that they're part of the meetings, but so they're also part of what the district does in the process. So what we're making sure is that all the different pieces align and clearly show how's that school moving towards achieving the growth that they need to for every child to be successful in the school. So what that policy really has given us is the ability to say, these are the pieces aligned to make sure scheduling, the extended time that we have, the curriculum, pretty much anything you see in here is part of what now that plan is really looking like. And so we even have 2 additional days scheduled just to make sure that that plan is really solid and really shows all the work that's being done. So it solidifies and is clear to the staff on the site how they're moving forward and how this aligns with what the district has in place.
Thank you. You
Dr.
said
Carr,
very eloquently what I had on my mind, and you covered.
Dr.
most
Carr,
questions I
in
had.
relation to that, something that came to mind when you made that explanation, is it, how far are our schools as far as when you look at one school versus another school, are we pretty much in alignment, or are there, I know there are different needs, different schools, but I guess my question is, are we good at identifying those areas and getting everybody back in alignment, or is it something, I don't know how to.
So when you look at the plan, there are certain indicators every school has to work on so that we're in alignment and working through the same process. But the other piece we did this meeting is say, how does leverage leadership work in what you're doing? So thinking about and making sure that everybody's using the procedures and processes in the staff development that we've gained to help with that continuous improvement, so that we're all leading the same direction, but still have individual plans based on their needs. So even though we all are working on observation feedback or data informed instruction, what it may look different is who's going to help support them in the process in that building. But everybody's working pretty much on the same initiatives and same areas, just the path that they're taking may look a little different based on that particular school's needs.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and so Wendy and Robert, talk about historically, we required plans to be completed maybe late September. We back that up and then talk about Title I funding linked to these plans now.
So we've set up several dates throughout to help them because they do revise it every month. But what we want them to do is not wait till September to make big revisions. So just like you think about policies constantly revising, we want them to consistently revise. So big revisions, we're working with them right now so that before school starts, they'll have major revisions completed to their plan so that it clearly shows where they are and what they need to do before they walk into the school year. The other piece is, just like we always talk about, funds have to align with what your plan is. So if there's particular needs, we have to make sure with Title I, and Dr. Rock can speak to any other funds, that everything aligns and shows alignment to what we're doing. So if we're saying that they need additional teachers, for example, in their building because of particular needs, the plan should reflect that. Their data should reflect that. So in the plan, it should actually state, I'm going to use my funding to help buy an additional teacher to support the needs of my building. So everything should clearly align. And so one of our meetings is going to specifically address, are your funding sources aligning with what your needs are and what's in your plan?
What we did this year is to make sure that when they send in their purchase orders or send in their needs list, that we look to see if it's aligned to your action step or your goal that you have listed in your school improvement plan. So we would be cross-referencing whether it was low wealth funds, whether it was remediation funds, Title I funds, just to make sure that they weren't just spending, just to be arbitrarily spending. So it had to be tied to their school improvement plan.
That the same way with resources that we purchase?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And Dr. Carr alluded to this, but I was glad to see that there is some wiggle room, if you will, and it uses the term waiver or to set aside or to revise a particular aspect of the school improvement plan to accommodate an innovative activity or something that the teacher sees that a mid-course correction that these students can be reached better by not doing this or not doing it in the same way, whatever it might be. But at the same time, you walk a fine line between innovation and accommodation and the objectives mandated by DPI, right? Is that still a factor? And I'm out of the loop on that about the DPI compliance factor.
So we still have to make sure we follow any guidelines. So if it's a certain type of school, there's certain things they do have to have in place. But as far as mostly, we can adapt it based on the data. So if the data says that it's a need, then we can put it in place. But then we also have to think, I think more so what we're talking about is funding. Funding can't be used for certain things. So certain things cannot be innovative. So if I want to put a playground in there in my budget, in my school improvement, I can't do that because that's not going to help with school improvement itself when we look at those pieces because their funding sources don't allow it. So they have to think about what is innovative as far as needs. So if it's Saturday Academy or something like that, that's different because it aligns with the needs of the students in that building.
What's the turnaround on an improvement as far as the audited process versus the implementation?
Can you
Like, in other words, if there's a need identified in a particular school and you put tools in place and resources, teachers or whatever, to make that happen, how long do you go before you come back and audit the process to ensure that you're meeting the need?
So school improvements required to meet twice a month. And that's particularly why, because you have to look at how are they doing with what they put in place. So you previously, and I know a lot of us have served on school improvement teams, you met once a year, you said it was there and it was over. That's where this is different. You're required to meet twice a month to say, yes, this is working based on the data I have, or no, it's not. So it has to be clear alignment. I can't just put something in and then I know 6 months later it's not working. I have to look at it monthly to say this is not working. How do we adjust and make changes based on the data? Or who do I need to reach out to because I need additional support to help me with those needs?
So our conversation has really been around two things. One, we're going to move this from being a compliant document. And then the second part was from being a summative document to a formative document that we're looking monthly and daily to that. And that's a major shift in the mindset to make this a formative document.
Yeah, that's the spirit that I got from this. And I'm very grateful for that because I know in the past it seemed to kind of tie hands as far as what you could do. And there's, of course, this addresses it at length as it should.
Make a motion, we'll accept 3430 policy.
All right, sounds good. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Yeah, Dr. Carr, thank you for your comprehensive involvement with this. That's excellent. And Dr. Robert, you as well. That brings us to 4110, immunization and health requirements for school admission. I was looking at the list of immunizations and they really haven't changed over the years. It looks like the same ones that have been there for a very long time. And again, this is straightforward. And then it goes on to health assessments and vision screening, which again, I did not see that there were any major changes to those processes as they are. I did have a question. I'm looking at 4110 B under health assessments, vision screening. student who failed, and I'm about midway of the paragraph under section B. Student who fails to meet requirements will not be permitted to attend school until the health assessment form has been presented. Are we holding fast to that?
Well,
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
A child's in school, identified that a child needs immunization or a required shot. What do we do with the child if the parent doesn't get the child their needs within, say, a month? Or what is the process with that? Is the child deprived from an education, or is that a remote online situation? Or
that has been our practice, and we appreciate the health department working with us. Ms. Jennifer Freeman is over this area and has done a tremendous job of really bringing our numbers in line, been very intentional about that. But it is always our intent to meet the law and the policy, but also we're governed that we have to provide education to our kids. And so until they get those shots, we have resorted to remote. But again, that's short term.
Any other
is it,
questions?
if a parent continues to be negligent, Dr. Williamson, does the school have the right to give that child those shots with the traveling medical lab that we have?
That is the only way. Parents have a right to request an exemption because of religious basis and that, but at some point we have to, as a district, get that done. We have not really had an issue with parents refusing to do that. And again, we've worked with the health department, the mobile labs to get that work done, but we have not. But unless it's that legal piece, then it has to be. And so we work with parents, have not really had a major issue.
Yeah, I was paying particular attention to the section about vision, help. And, all of us that have worked with children, if we were there for any length of time, it doesn't take a long time to identify students who have vision problems. And if it's ongoing, then their academic performance suffers. And we've already mentioned that, and I hate to pick on parents, but ultimately it's the parents' responsibility to get that help. And Dr. Roberts, you're nodding your head there. Anything you can add to that?
Well, anytime it refers, to the student's academic well-being, we make notification to the parents and say, I noticed that, Sam is having problems seeing, and we make that recommendation. So yes.
Do we have a source of help here financially for where it's needed to make that happen? Is that, or connection with some source that does? Is there any help along those lines?
I know that they make a lot of effort in reaching out to different organizations that we have partnered with to help try to get them support if that's necessary. So the Care Council that I know Ms. Freeman's talked about and some others, there's some organizations that Ms. Shanika Lee and other people can help support and find some resources when it's necessary to try to get them the resources they need.
Again, the mobile help lab has really made a difference because it's on site and it's
Right.
really made a difference.
Right. Okay. Moving on here. Are there any other, there are a number of different topics that are addressed in section 4110.
Make a motion to accept policy 4110 revision.
Is there a second? Can we get a second on policy 4110? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. That brings us 4240/7312, child abuse and related threats to child safety. How are we, on the whole, anybody, how are we doing with reporting detection or suspicion of child abuse? Are we doing a good job with that?
Part of our ongoing training is just that requirement by law to report. And Bobby, you probably have a better handle on in terms of the reporting. But again, that's part of our ongoing PD training for employees and staff members to report suspected.
And Ms. Jadale and her staff are primarily responsible for this. And there are incidents that have come through me that I've had to work with Ms. Jadale on to ensure students got the appropriate services they needed based on whether the home environment wasn't where it needed to be. So Ms. Jadale and her staff work diligently to ensure this happens.
We hear so much about, and more about child trafficking, and I think most of us have kind of a shield up, hoping it's not happening around here.
It is. You might not know it, but it's happening. It's sad to say.
Well, that was my thought. It's kind of undercover. It's not readily apparent. It's veiled. But yeah, I think we would be naive to think that it's not happening here. Yeah, I'm just putting that out there. Okay, and again, this section is very comprehensive. Obviously, cooperate. I'm looking at 4240/7312, 5 of 8. Due to report licensed employees to the state superintendent of public instruction. And I hope that's not. We don't have incidences of that. Cooperation with state and local agencies. That's a given. I remember I was just thinking as I read the part about children being interviewed by law enforcement on school campuses during school hours and other court officials or law enforcement related persons.
Mr. Chair.
And I was always careful to make sure that there was knowledge and permission that the parent was at least aware that this was happening. Yes, sir.
I was looking at section G, child sexual abuse and sex trafficking training program. I think that's good that we have that in this policy. And I was just wondering when that takes place. Is that beginning of each school session? And if we take on new staff, is that at orientation?
So that's actually part of also the mental health policy. So that we signed earlier this year with the state. So there's so many hours, like you said, 2 hours of training required. So part of the training that every staff member gets in their mental health training is the 2 hours of training on a yearly basis.
Yes, sir.
We're doing it. It's done in even numbered years.
I'm sorry, even numbers.
So that is still like
Yes,
count. It's like
that's
that's
just-
every 2 years. This
It
is
just
done.
started.
Just started. Okay. Oh.
Yes, sir.
Let's see if I can remember. There was one other thing someone said. Oh, about the police talking with students. You know, we're still, without me looking here, if the police wants to talk to a 10-year-old at school, we still go through getting permission from the parent. Is that still, that's still in place? You do that. And I will say, and this is just a call at school, I seen the situation where I had to deal with the police come and wanted to talk to a student, and I couldn't get a parent, so didn't allow it. But I think we gave an address or home address for them. You can go to the house and talk to them. Well, the parent ended up getting very upset that we had gave that address because they didn't want them coming to their house. But so we are okay with that address, giving that out like that. There's nothing in there I've seen that says you couldn't do that when we couldn't get up with the parent. So that's fine.
If there's an error in that, I'd rather err on the side of that.
way. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're bound by statute to cooperate with any law enforcement investigation, and we cannot interfere with that. And yeah, whatever determined to meet that, we do reach out to parents, but they have a right that they, depending on the age of the child.
Well, and that was a follow-up I had. Is there an age increment where parental permission is not necessary?
Bobby, you might have.
I'm not aware of that, Mr. Gentry, but if we find it.
Because I ran into that fairly often, particularly one school where I was. And I was, but like Mr. Craig just said, I erred on the side of, if I wanted somebody coming down on me, I wanted somebody coming down on me for a reason of, on the side of the student.
I think Section H covers some of that, talking about the grade levels.
Okay. Appropriate information service to students in grades 6 through 12. Abuse and neglect, including age-appropriate information on such information all grades.
If a child feels that they've been a trafficked child or whatever, I don't foresee trying to get in contact with a parent is going to help the situation.
Yeah, that's the other side of this, is it's the timing, because, you know, they may have a lead that they need to act on quickly. It's kind of a catch-22 in a way. Okay, we'll move on if there are no further comments or questions.
Make motion to accept 4240/7312
Okay,
policy
is
revision.
there a second? All in favor say aye. Moves us on to approved. Okay, student sex offenders. This is another sensitive situation. The registered student who's a registered sex offender still has the right to attend public schools on a regular basis. That's the way I read it. And obviously the administration needs to know who they are, but again, there's a fine line between monitoring and targeting. The language speaks to that generally, but I see how that could be a sensitive situation. I'm just making that comment.
We're certainly dependent on other agencies to make this information known to us, because once we have that case, it's how we monitor kids who have been identified, but we need social service and other agencies to notify us. But it's critical because, again, the language is clear. If you have students identified, you cannot leave them alone with a group of kids. You've got to make sure you have them monitoring in place.
And are they or are they not allowed to attend after-school functions?
That is a possibility, but it really, as administration can make that decision to do that. As extracurricular, the norm has been, no, because the right to that education is the key and not extracurricular activity. But again, administration can make that decision.
The more latitude involved in that, in the after-school activity.
That's correct.
Mr. Gentry, let me, point here, tell me if I'm misunderstanding. That second sentence, registered sex offenders expressly prohibited present on any property and attending school-sponsored related activities except to receive their education. So now, if that wording, if they're there going to school at 10 o'clock, it's fine. But I'm taking that they couldn't be there after school at an activity or at other activities. So let's now tell if I'm misunderstanding that, the way that's worded.
Except to the extent the student is permitted to be on school property to receive educational services. It does, that's pretty plain, isn't it?
And then now my question is too, I'm gonna throw this out. Okay, if they couldn't attend, could they be on the basketball team? And there's some, would that be considered part of that educational component? And I guess, Dr. Winston, my other question is to y'all, and I'm not saying if it's known or not, I mean, how many, what's the number? Do we have any kind of number of what this would actually be on campuses now? I mean, it's been identified?
Not to my knowledge, because that's confidential information that you really can, again, and then in some cases, extracurricular part of that sound-based education. So we normally take all that on a case by case. But if it's just to attend a function, that answer is no. But if it's participation in that curriculum, then we have to make that determination.
Confidential for just those that need to know.
Absolutely.
Well, and of course, that if that student is allowed to play on a particular team, then, you know, obviously he's going to be more under scrutiny and observation than someone just attending the game. Any other comments, questions about 4260 student sex offenders? We hear a motion that we accept it.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Rules for use of seclusion and restraint in schools. And there are numbered situations there in section A addressing physical restraint.
Chair, if I may, Dr. Locklear, again, this is ongoing PD through our EC department, correct?
We just met with our consultant 3 weeks ago to schedule the training for the upcoming school year because it's required.
Any other comments? Questions? Section B on page 2 of 6 addresses mechanical restraint. Dr. Robert, are there situations that ongoing now where that's enforced? Mechanical? And I don't know what all mechanical would include, but obviously it's something other than human contact.
Because I know, like, you know, with seatbelts on our buses and the assisted technology devices, things like that. Yes, we do have some in our school system. Yes,
Probably a small amount.
small number. Yes, sir.
Mr. Gentry, this is gonna sound funny, but I don't mean for it to. You don't put a student in a closet or a place like that, and you don't tie students down. And I mean, a lot of things here about restraint, but you don't tie them down, and you don't isolate them by putting them in a place like that. And you can read throughout this country, that happens. It has happened in places where that stuff like that's been done. In many cases, they were EC students too. It's just don't do it.
I think if we're doing our IEPs, like Dr. Carr had mentioned, we put all the tools and resources in place. We shouldn't go to that extent.
And there is extensive language addressing that, and I'm thankful for that. And we know about 504 plans and Henry, I think you were just alluding to that. You know, the particular plan for the particular student allows certain things and disallows others. But I think this addresses it very comprehensively from what I can gather from it. Any other questions, comments on that section?
Make a motion, we'll set 4302R.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. This next section was, it was very comprehensive, and you know, this day and time, I'm glad for it because there's more and more of this going on with unmanned aircraft at school events, and while there is our distinct advantage of that from the standpoint of recording, my brother, who is a videographer, uses this a lot, and it does. Well, it's on our website. You can go just about any place, any entity, and there are examples of aircraft that ground-controlled aircraft that are used for videos. But there are inherent dangers from that, and I was thankful that the policy as presented prohibits, for example, at ball games, the aircraft are not allowed to fly over the stadium or the stadium the part that's occupied, and you really have to know your stuff to be able to and I don't do this, my brother could tell you all about it, but to make sure that aircraft complies with that, because any error in controlling that aircraft could mean extensive injury to a lot of people. So I'm glad to see this thoroughly addressed. Ms. Bob, do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
Mr. Chair, I've seen situations also where the drone was a great resource in monitoring roofs of our schools. I know a joint effort with our maintenance department and Dr. Teal has worked tremendously in some cases, especially where it was probably unsafe to just randomly walk a roof.
And thank you for that, Henry. And also on page 3 of 9, the drone has to be operated by an FAA certified drone pilot. Not just anyone can pick up a drone and take it out and start it up without being certified. Do we have? Henry just mentioned a wonderful example. Or do we have other? And again, I know what's going on because I see evidence of it on the website and other places. Do we have a lot of this going on a regular basis?
Not to my knowledge. Our intent, though, is to offer this program to our students in the near future to do that. But in order for drones to be used at any school site, we have to have notification and approval by the superintendent according to this policy.
Right.
But again, we're excited about the possibility and opportunity to offer this program to our students.
Yeah. It is. Not only is it the wave of the future, it's here now. That's the way it's being done, a lot of it. And again, this is very comprehensive, and I appreciate that. And we could spend a lot of time discussing it.
Make a motion to accept 4334/5035/307345 policy revision.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. That brings us to attendance. 4,400. And this might be a good time to bring this in. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I handed out a new policy, a new recommendation for revision in attendance. This takes into account the current revisions that are in our manual, but also on page 2. And it is indicated in red to strike through our current policy that says the principal may, at his or her discretion, arrange for, and simply change that to say 12th grade students who present extreme hardship cases may request to have a regular dismissal in order to work or for other similar reasons. And to just simply take the statement out that says at the principal's discretion and just have it where the seniors, only for seniors, may request in hardship cases to be released early. And I do have some current numbers for this school year in terms of how many students would be counted as early release. So first semester, we had approximately 382. Second semester, that number goes up to almost 854. And that number includes both some students who are released at third period, and then also, well, of course, if they're released at third period, they're not in place at fourth period either. So we have some situations where kids, a large number of students are not enrolled for half the school day. And so with this revision, this would allow for us to offer more opportunities for students to be in school, to probably take that additional CTE course or to take an additional CCP course, where otherwise with them leaving, they're not really enhancing their education.
So if this is CTE, at what grade levels does that encompass?
This particular revision would only affect seniors. Everybody else, 9 through 12, our expectation is that those students are there taking 4 classes per semester.
Mr. Brewer, and that's a great question. If it's linked to CTE and the opportunity for an apprenticeship program or linked to that curriculum, then the grade level would not be limited to seniors. What we've had conversation around in those numbers is kids, some allowed to come in second period and not linked to any type of training program, kids being early released without having jobs in place. And so we're simply saying to our principals, follow the policy, because the evidence at this point has been that has not been the case. We're not eliminating this. I know some folks said we're not going to continue. No, we're going to monitor and follow the policy. And we've again taken out, it is not at the discretion of the principal, it's follow the policy based on the clearly defined guidelines. There needs to be a reason for early release.
Or coming in late. Or like you said, coming in second period or third period.
If it's linked again to some CTE program or a job, that's what's spelled out. But because I don't want to report to school at the normal hour, we've seen some of that. So again, we're going to enforce the policy and monitor it.
Dr. Williamson said that this is kind of taking away that discretion. Just you follow the policy and you got to have something in place to lead. Let me ask this. This is, if I'm thinking a plug for technology school too. Students could take, if they took 4 classes each semester, that's going to be 8 classes in a year. That's 32 classes if they took it in 4 years. Now, what's the requirement now for graduation? Is 20,
For less than the max 28.
28,
Mhm.
okay? So if you're taking all those classes and going and we're talking about extra classes, then you get this technology school. Then you got where you can go take an extra class that you would not have taken.
Right.
And you could get some additional training and find something that you might not have been interested in. And this would be an opportunity to go down and take classes we're talking about. So this is just another way of looking at what we're trying to do with that.
And then the other part of the conversation is, as a board, you do allow early graduation. So those December grads and those numbers are constantly going up. So again, we're just simply for safety, other concerns, we follow this policy in terms of early release for our students. Otherwise, we put ourselves at risk.
Mr. Bobby, this handout addendum, is this, is this just a copy of the policy itself? Or
Yes.
along with the suggested revisions?
Yes, so the suggested revisions, we would go back to our current policy, which we have here. I would go back to our current policy and add those items under excused absences where it has isolation and quarantine, C2, and also 10 under C where it talks about any other reason approved by the board.
I see item G looks to be a little more wordier than what's in the original policy. That additions also.
Right, so what you see in our so G would be our current policy. What we have here in your hand. And so this is what we're going to revise to include their recommendation here and to strike through. So what your current policy you have in your hand is there are no revisions to G.
Let me be clear then. With G, okay, I see how it corresponds word for word at the beginning, in the beginning paragraph. But there is an additional paragraph
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
alluding
in the
to.
handout.
Right, so when the revisions are submitted to the School Board Association, we would leave G intact as it is in our current policy.
Okay, got you. So this
And
was
so
taken,
the only revisions that are going to be added to our current policy would be the recommendation of the 12th grade and then to add the 2 statements about our quarantine and any other reason.
got you.
Make a motion, we'll accept policy 4400 revision.
I do want to make a comment. I shared this with Dr. Williamson earlier, and those of us that have been administrators, I think, can relate to this. And that's valid reasons for excused absences. And this, the lettering of the reasons pretty much covers it all. But if you've been an administrator and part of attendance, you know, you get a plethora of all kinds of reasons that are not valid in corresponding with this and are not written by parents, obviously. And some are written by parents, obviously under duress from their children. And I'm gonna just be honest. In the day, whenever that day was, we as administrators, or at least I did, experience certain pressure to comply with whatever reason was there. Hey, we're gonna get them on through, doesn't matter, check them off. So what I'm asking here is we're gonna hold feet to the fire on these. And I realize this could be a time-consuming process, but it needs to be addressed. If we're gonna have an attendance policy, we need to enforce it. And quite honestly, in all cases, it has not been enforced in the past. I don't know if maybe that's changed now, but and I think those of us who've been administrators would agree with what I'm saying, whether you're here right now or not.
Mr.
Any
Chair, if I
comments on
may.
that?
So going back to G, the chronic absenteeism. So I do know Mr. Dale and her support staff, once a child enters into one of those, of having excessive absences, she does require her social workers and any other support staff, YDS, to come in and write an attendance agreement contract with those families. And the situation she and I have worked together where parents have gone to court prior to that social worker taking those parents to court. Part of the procedures that she has her social workers to do is to come up with an attendance plan for those individuals.
Well, I like that. I'll just say that. I like that. We need, in my opinion, we need to hold feet to the fire. I'll just repeat that.
I agree. And the attendant policy, you know, if it's working, because at the end of the day, the conversation is about course credit or grade promotion based on attendance. So that's how you really know if the kids did not make up the work that on the seat time with that. But the real question is, do we apply the policy in terms of attendance? And if not, are we still giving credit or we're still promoting? That's the real conversation.
Exactly. I'm grateful to hear what you just said. That being said, I'll get off my soapbox. Are there any other questions on policy 4400, attendance? Hear none, I'm going to hear a motion that we accept it as presented. Okay, all in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Motion carries. All right, 5240, advertising in the schools. That's a very broad topic and one that does bear some scrutiny, you know, between what's legit and what's not. And I'll just summarize by asking another broad question. Is that a current issue or a current problem about various entities that are under our existing policies and under our concept of what's right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable? Or is this being, are we having issues with this, with problems with this, with certain individuals or entities that are not permitted under our philosophy and our policies, wanting to come and post advertisements? I won't get into any specific examples. I think we all know what I'm talking about.
As superintendent, I've always restricted that and said no, because once you open that door, how do you determine who that piece? And so from my perspective, I've always restricted advertisement in schools.
Yeah.
I have, and the policy allows that.
Dr. Williamson, I know in the past, I don't know if we still do it or not. Our school annuals, we would have sections that we would sell ads for advertisement. Does this policy cover that, or is that an exception to the rule? I understand non-school related items shouldn't be just freely distributed or posted within schools. but I was wondering about the annual process.
Mr. Chair, if I may, page 2D1 will address that. And again, my experience in the school is once that school yearbook is put together, the principal has the authority to edit that yearbook before it goes to publication. So it says the school official may allow for, and then it uses the language such, publications such as yearbooks.
I like, I guess that's 4 point. No, okay, 4 is struck through, 3 is a new number. School officials shall prohibit advertising through the school system employee and student email system and the school system website. I'm glad to see that. I've got it. I'm sorry, go ahead, Henry.
That brings another concern too with our CTE program. If we have businesses that are hiring and we have graduates, how do we go about getting that information to our graduates through the CTE program without overstepping the boundaries?
Well, if I may, Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when we do our career day or career expo, sure we have those companies come, but according to this, as long as we are not promoting that student to say you need to sign with this company, I think we're okay. Because we do a lot of partner with, and you know this for a fact, Mr. Henry, a lot of businesses here in Robeson County,
So it's basically a separate entity saying we're having job career day.
sir.
I have a question that this came up in my career. This is way old, so I'm not going to point out any particular person, group. But there was we had a school system sanctioned photographer that was going to come in and take senior portraits. And this individual stopped on the side of the road, and he had flyers. He, got wind of what was happening, and he was flagging down students. And this was at high school level. He was flagging down students driving up in the parking lot, and some were even stopping on the side of the road. And he was handing out these bulletins. And I told him he had to leave, and he told me he had permission from XYZ to be there. And I wasn't the administrator at that time. I actually was a teacher, had parking lot duty. I did tell the principal about it, and I don't think anything was done about it. But what I'm getting at is where geographically, if somebody wants to hand out flyers advertising X, Y, and Z, it's going to be school connected or not school connected. Is there a geographical limitation as to how close they can be to the campus?
The language I'm used to is on site where we have authority to ask someone to leave. If it's that public role and people understand that, we don't.
Yeah, I think that's how you got around it. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on 5240?
Motion to approve policy 5240 changes.
Second? There's a second? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. 6220, operation of school nutrition services.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, the biggest change here is going to be in number 8. And again, I think if we make reference back to our chart, This is a requirement that we need to add. The language needs to change from minimum of 1 month to of at least 2 months. And that is a required change. And also based upon our current policy, we are also suggesting, since we are CEP, community CEP, that we remove section B because we do not charge any child for lunch. So although this is the standard recommended policy from School Board Association, we do recommend taking out that B, and B is currently not in our policy.
Mr. Bobby, I understand what you're saying. But I'm not sure where we'll be at in the future, but if we come back to that position, would it be, even though we don't use section B, I'm wondering if it would be harder to bring it back than it would to eliminate it if there was a need in the future.
Yeah, Henry, I don't think it's a problem to bring it back. Bobby, you remember offhand what our free and reduced percentage is in the county? Yeah, I did roughly. I thought it might.
Well, the way it's currently calculated through CEP, children that we would deem under the old way of free and reduced lunch must receive services through DSS. So again, that number kind of drops if we can't verify that they're getting some type of assistance through DSS.
Well, Mr. Henry, I'm gonna answer this way. We went to this policy a year or two after I retired, and that's been now over 12 years. So we've been where it's everybody now for over 12 years. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think, it could change. I don't know that we would go back to where we would dip to those levels. We'd have to start charging. That's just my thought. I will say this, Mr. Bobby, and I know it can't be done, but on number 8, when they changed that indirect cost to, you gotta have at least 2 months, we would tremendously make Ms. Charlene Locklear and the whole child nutrition department very happy if that word indirect cost was, you know what I'm talking about. It's a nightmare for child nutrition, but it's not nothing we can do anything about. It's a very complicated thing, but it can deplete child nutrition funds when you don't have it.
May I ask for a point of clarification? As it relates to CEP, that eligibility and B meal charges, the references, I think we don't need to take that out, because if we ever revert back, then what this is really telling us, if kids do not have the financial means, they can charge some lunches with limits set to that. So again, I don't see any reason, because if that ever happens, then that's always been a part of, if I'm understanding correctly.
But for my clarification now, is the way it stands right now, there are 3 categories. There's students that are paying full price, or students that are paying not, there are no students paying full price?
No, everybody eats
They're all
free.
free.
It's free.
Okay, well,
Everybody's free, and
I've
get
been out of the loop
reimbursed.
on that.
And that's more money coming in child nutrition than it would be if they were paid.
Right.
That's the advantage of doing it this way, because you get more reimbursement when they are free than you do if they're paying and the reimbursement.
So there are 2 categories, free or reduced.
We just, all of ours is free.
Okay,
I'm not gonna say all of ours now is free.
okay, gotcha.
But there is a possibility that we would not qualify for CEP at some point, or individual schools will qualify. And so again, if I'm understanding B meal charges, the reference is for those kids who would have to pay full price or reduced, would the system allow them to charge meals and then pay that account? And the answer to that would be yes. We just need to set limits to how many meals they could charge before the account is paid out in full.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, the policy also addressed that at a certain point they would get paid, they would receive an alternative meal.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. You have to provide some type of meal for students. You cannot turn them away and not serve students on that. So again, to Mr. Brewer's point, I think we need to be in any event that some school, one of our schools are not eligible or we're not eligible.
Dr. Williams, let me ask it, and now it could be changed. When my understanding, when they went to this program, it was done this way. It had to include all the schools. Now, I could be wrong on that, that with the program we're doing, it's you do all of them or you don't do them. There was not a leave out Pembroke Middle. Everybody is included in it, and it's because the county-wide level that used to be
That's-
there. Yeah,
That's-
well, they weren't left out with Title I, but they could be put in this because we did it countywide. So, and I will say this on the charging, if you need to add something there. Problem we had with charging, the account at one time, and it did it for 2 years. The amount that had been charged was $100,000. And I see and say that's impossible. The account, it was $100,000 had been charged by students. And, you know, you tried to collect it, but now that's one of the reasons I'm going to this year. It just made it better for the system and made it better for when the state said you qualify, which we were talking about it when I was there, but after I left, the qualification was there. Well, it was a no-brainer to go to this. It brought more money into child nutrition and it relieved that burden of worrying about paying for or not paying for. So hopefully it stays there because it's a win-win to me for both sides.
Do we still have like an ice cream plan where students could purchase side items like ice cream? Is that covered in this policy if we take out section B?
Well, if the kid doesn't have money, then the cafeteria is not going to sell it to him. So the child has to have that. That's an a la carte item. Yes. So that means the kid will either have to have the money or have an account set up.
Make a motion, we'll accept policy change to 6220 with striking out section B meal charges.
For clarification, now that obviously section B goes all the way down to midway of page 4 or 5. So we're talking about all that in total, right? I mean, we don't have, since we're eliminating, there's no need to fill in any blanks in terms of charges because we're eliminating the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, right?
All of that goes would be.
Okay, gotcha. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, 6305, safety and student transportation services. I found this to be very straightforward and thorough. I did not even jot down any questions or comments there myself.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's covered here. What is the protocol if a bus driver pulls up to a daycare and there may or may not be vehicles in the parking lot? Or is someone supposed to greet the child or ever who can getting off the bus at front door or whatever?
Mr. Chair, I do know that for our pre-K kids, 4-year-olds, someone must be at the bus stop or bus pickup. Now, anything outside of that, I'm not aware that the bus driver must confirm that someone's home or at the daycare or not. But the only ones that we're required to make that contact with or have someone visible would be that our pre-K students.
To what extent do we have, for lack of a better term, they call them safety assistants here, bus monitors riding the bus Is that, how are we doing that, or are we doing that at this point?
We are doing it at some of our locations, especially since we've had to increase the number of students on buses. I do know we have a handful of elementary schools that have bus monitors on them.
And also, Mr. Bobby, EC, our EC buses.
How do we stand with the cameras on the buses? We pretty much got them covered now.
Not all of our buses have cameras. Originally, some of the schools allotted their own funding to get those cameras put on the bus. But what Dr. Guzman is looking at now is equipping the remainder of our buses with cameras. We're getting a quote on that along with radios.
But do we have buses, a lot of buses stopping at after-school daycare or daycares that are not part of the school system? One time we didn't do that. I mean, so are they stopping at places like that now?
Let me verify with Dr. Guzman and Dwayne on, if so, how many do we have?
Am I correct? One time we did not do that? It wasn't, for whatever reason. I'm just saying it just didn't happen. So, yeah, it'd be good to check on just tonight.
For me, historically, my practice has always been, if it's part of your normal route, you can't go out of the way. But if it's part of your normal route, then
Stop.
you can stop. Yes.
Are we in full compliance with accident reporting? Hopefully that's in a minimum. And obviously for many reasons, you want timely reporting of any accident, regardless of how serious it may be. Has that been an issue at all?
In terms of anything, I'm only aware of one possible situation this school year where a bus driver may have kept going after an incident. But it was an incident where the driver tapped the back of the bus, and there was no way that the bus driver would have physically felt the damage.
Right. Gotcha.
Make a motion to accept 63.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Brings to 6560, disposal of surplus property.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, and going back to our original 6560, on the first blank there, A, that dollar amount is going to mirror our other policy of $30,000. And when this policy came up for revision earlier, on page 2 of 3, where it makes reference to for property worth with a blank or more but less than blank, that is being able to say, well, we're going to sell an individual piece of property. Hugh said that on conversation with Hugh, this is a practice that we've never done. It's coming in and selling individual pieces of surplus. So his recommendation, and our current policy reflects this as well, is to remove that based upon the staffing and who's going to determine how much a piece of property is worth, surplus property is worth.
Okay, so Ms. Bobby, you're recommending that we eliminate the section that begins with 4, has a 6 by it.
No, sir. Recommend we remove the yes, sir. The 6th paragraph and the paragraph immediately below it.
Okay.
But leave in the superintendent shall provide a semi-annual report.
So, Mr. Bobby, that eliminating that gets away from selling something.
Anybody want something to drink or a snack or something?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Anybody?
Yes, that gets away from us saying if we have a lawnmower that is surplus, someone coming in and saying, well, I think this lawnmower is worth $1,000. Somebody else comes in and says, well, I'm gonna value the lawnmower at $500. Well, that's what would be allowed in these 2 paragraphs. So Mr. Hugh is saying, let's just leave all of our surplus and sell it at one time.
Definitely agree. Leave it there. carry down there and do the auction as we've been doing. Cause you'll start ended up with people coming to school. To me, I could see,
Oh, yeah.
I hear Prospect's got a lawnmower. I'm gonna go out there at 10 o'clock and see if I can buy that lawnmower.
Yeah.
That eliminates that.
Yes,
I've
sir.
always just told people, we can't sell something. It's gotta be turned in and we do surplus.
Any other comments, questions on 6560?
Make a motion to accept policy changes 6560 with the elimination of the paragraphs that Bobby mentioned.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. All right, move on to leave, 7510. With the current status of COVID-19, and obviously we have made adjustments in our policies relative to that. And that's not to say that COVID-19 is gone for good, but I did make a note above that particular paragraph, temporary requirements related to COVID-19. I just said, what is happening with this? I'm sure we haven't taken away all of our monitoring. At least I don't think we have all of our monitoring procedures and devices in place. And to what extent is that happening at this point? How are we approaching that?
In the beginning, COVID, it was almost automatic to leave without the option of asking for verification. So at this point, we have the right to ask for verification in terms of using leave time. There was federal days that were provided by the federal government does not exist anymore. So this is limited at this point. But we do ask for verification that it is COVID related. So that's the change.
Medical evidence.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Mr. Superintendent, it's been brought to my attention where teachers may have left for medical reasons or whatever. And after a period of time, they come back, they may or may not be at that particular job, at that particular school. What is the current policy on getting that information in a contract form for those staff members?
Can you clarify your question? Are you saying that they automatically return to the same building? Because the law says something different, that we cannot reduce their position or pay, but there's no obligation to return them to, it simply says they have a right to a job, but not necessarily at the same site. Right, right. No, it's just policy that we follow, and hopefully when those individuals, that's explained through HR. Yeah.
Gentry, I want to make a motion that we accept 7510. If that's where we are, make a motion that we do accept it, but then I do have one comment after that.
Okay, go ahead with your comment.
Just that with the COVID-19 and with any kind of leave, the only comments I would give sometime, and I know every situation is what that situation is that when it is looked at, that we're as consistent as we could be to everyone. You get a comment that, okay, well, they could do this, but I couldn't do this. And I know sometimes that don't work that way and people might not understand it, but down here, when the situations come up, that we're consistent. If Mike gets this year time and he's got it and I come up and have a situation, I should get it too, if that's feasible. And what's here is fine, but just make sure we're consistent with dealing with it. Because there'll be things that'll come up next fall when school starts, be it COVID or not, about people being out. That's it. I make a motion, we do accept 7510.
All right, motion second, acknowledge. I do have a question about vacation leave. Vacation leave may be taken only upon authorization of the employee's immediate supervisor and in accordance with legal requirements, procedure established by the superintendent. Clarify for me, vacation leave, is that with or without pay?
That is, in most cases, with pay. For instance, Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, those.
And there's, as you just illustrated, there are calendar days where
That's correct.
That's already in the calendar, but a vacation that an employee opts to take on his own during the school year. Are there special circumstances where has to be considered about that? Obviously, it's kind of open-ended. It looks kind of open-ended here to me.
Right. We would always hope that the planning would happen, that it would not happen during the normal instructional time. We know that happens depending on what that type of trip is. And principals normally would question and sign off on that. So we feel like we can't draw a hard line and say, no, you can't take this week. In a lot of cases, my husband's worked with this company, they're sending, and so we try to work with, but it's our hope that they won't do it during normal instructional time, but it happens.
I just want to clarify that.
And normally it's leave without pay when that's the situation.
Is there a limit to the number of vacation days?
Somebody kick in, not that I'm aware of.
Build into, if you want to talk about I'm sorry. If you want to talk about what the state provides, every employee gets the 10 annual leave days that are built into the calendar, and that's basically what we build our, 10 annual leave days, which helps us build into the calendar spring break, Thanksgiving, Christmas break. Depending on when Christmas falls in any school year, the state also allows an X number of what we're going to call holidays that employees would get. So typically in a school year, we are able to provide our 10-month/teachers vacation annual leave days of about 20 days per year. Total that are built in from the time kids start till the time kids leave. And again, that are all your holidays and the 10 annual leave days.
So doing a quick calculation, it sounds like there would be roughly 8 to 10 vacation days, setting aside the holidays.
Holiday 10 annual leave days are guaranteed. Holidays varies depending on the day that Christmas falls. And it is normally 10 to 12. It's hard to.
How much notice is required for a vacation leave?
That would be determined at the principal's level. We don't have anything in policy here.
And again, because that is one of the benefits provided by the state, that option to take time off, leave without pay. I don't think we can say no. I'm clear on what you're saying.
And I get that. Haven't been there and done that. I totally get that.
Right.
But I just wanted some clarification.
Right.
Ms. Craig, you have.
It's just, Mr. Gentry, I'm not saying that I know what you're saying, but I'm going to use this example. We get out at Thanksgiving and we get out on a Wednesday. and somebody who's a school employee, they've got a trip lined up, it's that whole week.
Right.
So then they end up that Monday and Tuesday taking leave without pay or whatever. And that occurs really all through the year. It's probably something that I'm gonna say 10, 20, I know 30 years ago, did not occur like it does now, for whatever reason. It just, it occurs more now.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the stress or whatever, but it occurs more now than it used to occur, of taking time for whatever reason. And it could be a situation, husband or wife is somewhere, this is when they can get off, that's it. So they put something together and that's what they do. But it
Right.
just occurs more now than it used to.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving 7510, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes. Family medical leave, 7520.
Mr. Chair, FMLA is pretty much government regulated. I don't think there's much we can do with this policy other than accept what the government tells us we gotta follow.
I concur. I
I
concur.
make a motion
with that.
to accept 7520.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. All right. That's quite extensive there. So that brings us to 7540, voluntary shared leave. I have a question leading into that. Is this, to what extent is this happening in our system? Is there a lot of it going on? I'm just going to ask a general question about sharing. Is this a lot practiced a lot?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure to what degree. For this particular policy, you know, the definition is what's serious medical condition is what should drive that. But I'll be honest, we can find out.
Yes, I do believe it's become that a lot of times people are more willing to do this now if they really know the person that they're giving the leave to. And they know that situation and they've got days when they're willing to share.
Right. And just my observation, it does seem like it's happening more often, but there seem to be more situations where it warrants it for some reason than in the past.
I'll make a motion that we accept
Okay.
75.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Absence due to inclement weather. And I think central to this is the paragraph under number 7 about makeup time. I think that addresses that, which inherently is part of that condition or situation. And I think that's pretty much cut and dry as far as I'm concerned.
Motion to accept policy 7550.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Payroll deduction, 7620.
Question, Dr. Williamson and Mr. Bobby, has any of this changed from what Ms. Erkin had to do last year with our payroll and stuff?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. That's it. None of that's changed. I make a motion to accept.
And I think part of what you were addressing was that there's no longer a deduction for summer for 12-month pay.
They had to do it on.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Valuation of licensed employees, 7810. And I thought this very comprehensively addressed that particular policy as well.
Make a motion to accept 78.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Evaluation of non-licensed employees. I really like number 6. The superintendent and all evaluators are encouraged to develop ways to recognize exemplary employees and to capitalize on the abilities of exemplary employees in helping other employees. I know that we now have I'll call it a buddy system. It may be called something else, that where a new teacher or beginning teacher is partnered with a veteran teacher. Mentor. Okay, thank you. And there are other informal situations like that too. There seems to be a lot of that. That's great. There here a motion we accept.
Motion to accept 78-15 policy.
All in favor, say aye. 8320 depositories. I think that's straightforward as well.
Motion to accept 8320.
All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Sale and lease, sale, disposal, and lease of board-owned real property. Questions, comments?
We will follow the policy.
Yeah. From what I understand, we are.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second, there's a second? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Governing principle, student success. Bobby, help us on this. This seems to be an index.
Yes.
Uh,
So with the next section, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, with the next section, all of these are updates depending upon the work we've done in the previous section. So since we've made our updates or revisions in the previous section, then I would think that at this point, you could go ahead and just approve all of these at once, because this work is dependent upon the work we did at the beginning.
Chairman, I'll make a motion, we accept 1,200. 13, we say 1,200. 13, do all of them, 13.
That's what I was going to ask, if we could do them in mass. I think we can.
1,400. 1,500. 1,600. 1,700. 1,800. And then it gets to some new writing. So would it include that too, Bob?
Yes, because all of this, all of yes, the remainder of them, otherwise like fixes a typo, there's no language change.
Okay.
None of the language in the policies change, just either legal references or a typo.
So include 3,460. 4,120. 4,700. 5070-7350. 5071-7351. 7430. 7541. And that's it. Motion to include all of those policies.
Okay, and again, this reflects what the work we've already done and approved. So we're just adding emphasis by approving those now. And I would just like to add thanks to every everyone. I know a lot of work has gone into this, not, behind us, I'll call it behind the scenes because I'm not here every day. But thanks to everyone who had a part in this. I think there's been an excellent job done all the way around. Okay. There's been a motion made and a second. Any further discussion that we approve all of the policies that Greg just mentioned, which takes us to the very end. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just to clarify our agenda, we had planned to discuss a new policy, 6316, where classified employees is duty to drive a school bus. We have decided to pull that back at this time, so we will not have discussion on this.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion that we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Thank you all very much.